is watching us.
Does it scare you?
This is not what I signed up for. Who did you see? It was this thing.
Hello everybody, welcome back to Screenstars. I'm here today to bring you my review for the 2022 horror film Dark Nature. The film is co-written and directed by Berkeley Brady and it stars Madison Walsh, Hannah Emily Anderson and Kyra Harper. Now the film focuses on a group of women. Now all of these women have to some degree been abuse victims. And there's one in particular that has just got out of a really toxic and abusive relationship with her partner, and she joins this group of women. It's like a therapy group. There's 5 women, 4 women and a therapist that goes with them, and they essentially go like on a camping trip out in the woods to kind of get in touch with nature, face their abusive pasts, and heal, I suppose. While out in these woods, they start noticing and realising that something may or may not be watching them. And as the days go on, they progressively get more and more concerned about it. Some of them think it may be part of the therapy that the therapist is doing. But it escalates fairly quickly, and it soon turns out that these ladies are now fighting for their life. Right, what are my thoughts on Dark Nature? Well, it's hard when you start watching this film. It's hard not to compare it to some degree to films that have come before, like The Descent, and it almost feels like it's a cross between this film, The Descent, and there was that film called The Ritual that came out several years ago, about those group of guys who have faced trauma and kind of go off to kind of bond sort of thing out in the woods, and they run into danger. So it's a cross almost between those two films. Now, The Descent, obviously they go underground and stuff like that, whereas in this film they're not underground, they're like out in the middle of nowhere, out in some woods. But the group of women and the fact that they've all faced trauma and all that kind of stuff kind of feeds into this film. So it does share some similarities, certainly with The Descent, but more so The Ritual. And this film is really quite watchable for the most part. It's definitely not without its faults. I think the pacing will annoy some people. The lack of clarity on what is actually happening will probably frustrate some people that are watching. It's one of those films that doesn't necessarily explain itself particularly well. Now, some people quite like that when they watch a film. They don't necessarily want everything explained to them. They just kind of want to enjoy what's in front of them and then kind of, leave it at that. Some people like really to have a lot of things explained. This film doesn't necessarily do that, but I don't necessarily think it needs to either. I think sometimes films are best left with a little bit of mystery, and this film certainly has some of that. I think the performances here by all the actresses involved, and primarily it is all actresses, there is some scenes and flashback scenes with the partner of one of them in particular who was really abusive, and he's a absolute shitbag, obviously. But it's just, for the most part, it's these 5 women out in the middle of nowhere, out in the woods, sort of confronting their traumatic pasts. And that is the big chunk of the first half of the film. Now, you do get hints that something's not right. You get hints of something kind of observing them. You get hints at some of them having weird dreams. You get hints at some of them feeling like they're being watched and they're not alone. So it's not one of those films that just kind of gives you lots of drama and lots of talk about abuse and facing trauma and all that kind of stuff, because that would potentially put a lot of people off. It does keep that tension kind of bubbling away, that sense of dread that actually something could happen here, something's happening here, what is it? And it does leave a little bit of mystery there in a sense of, well, is it connected to this therapist? Is this what she's doing? And in actual fact, one of them actually questions the therapist and says, is this part of the therapy sort of thing? So it does kind of keep you going and guessing. And then when it is one of those films as well, when the reveal takes place, it's either going to underwhelm you or kind of meet your expectations. I suppose if you keep your expectations fairly lower their expectations, you were not going to be necessarily hugely disappointed. For me, it almost felt like an extended episode of, I don't know, the X-Files or something like, like the Monster of the Week type episodes, or something like that, or an episode of the Twilight Zone. It almost did feel like, or Tales from the Crypt or something like that, an anthology show where it's kind of been stretched out over a movie sort of thing. And it's not overly long or anything, it's about an hour and 25 minutes long. But it is a little bit of a chore to get through. It does make it a little bit easier that the way the film's shot is quite beautiful. Some of the scenery is quite beautiful to look at. I think they've done really quite well with that. And the performances are really quite strong by everybody involved. And you kind of, even though it focused heavily mainly on one or two of the women, it did kind of, you did get to learn a little bit about the other women as well in the group sort of thing. So it just depends, really. Is this a film that sounds interesting to any of you guys? You know what I mean? It's not a bad film. It's just I think it's a fairly unsatisfying film, and I think they could probably have ramped the horror up quite significantly to make this a real fright fest. It doesn't feel like a fright fest. And it feels like it really could have been. I think if they'd have dialed up the horror a little bit earlier in the film, sped up the pacing a little bit, I think we probably could have had a better film here. As it stands, what we've got here is a fairly average film that's fairly simple to watch. It's not a film that you're going to walk away from feeling, that it was a really terrible experience that you've just watched. It is certainly for some people, I think it probably will warrant a watch, and you'll probably get an awful lot out of it. For me, it felt a little bit somewhere in the middle. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. I definitely hope you found it useful. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll be back with more content on the channel very, very soon.